So the University of Texas, what is unusual about it is the way they do admissions. So most flagship state institutions, University of Michigan, University of Virginia, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, they have changed over the past couple of decades to look and act more like private institutions. They care more about test scores, they admit more out-of-state students, and they have now a wealthier and whiter student body than they used to. And the University of Texas has actually been heading in the opposite direction because 20 years ago, the Texas legislature passed this law called the top 10% rule. It's now actually the top 6% rule that states that if you are in the top 6% of your graduating class at any high school in Texas, according to your GPA, you're automatically admitted into UT Austin. They can't, no matter how low your test scores are, you're automatically admitted. And so that has led to this kind of remarkable freshman class that shows up each year in Austin. They have certain things in common. They're all Texans, and they're all excellent students because they're in the very tops of their classes. But there are a lot of things that are different about them. If you are in the top 6% of your class in a wealthy suburb of Dallas, you look a lot like those students at Ivy League schools or at the University of Virginia or the University of Michigan. But arriving in Austin each fall are also the top 6% of schools from ranching communities in rural West Texas and Latino communities in the Rio Grande Valley and inner city communities in Houston and San Antonio and Dallas. And they tend to have much lower family incomes and also lower SAT and ACT scores. And so these students arrive with these very different experiences, and until recently they were having very different outcomes at UT. The students who came in with lower test scores were graduating at much lower rates. And then a few years ago, UT decided to actually take on this question. Instead of just letting their students sink or swim, they decided they wanted to try to level the playing field. And they introduced a number of efforts to make those lower income, lower test score students feel more like a part of the community. They created support networks in freshman year that continued on to the rest of college. And remarkably, the graduation rates for those students went way up. All right, so that's point number one about UT. Point number two is about calculus. You may know this as parents of students existing in the United States today, but a generation or so ago, not many people took calculus in high school. It was something you took in college. Now, many, many people take calculus, and many people take AP calculus. There are about 800,000 students each year. About a fifth of all American high school seniors take calculus of some kind, and most of them take AP calculus. The remarkable statistic that really shocked me about AP calculus is that in Harvard's freshman class, 93% of students have taken AP calculus. And that is not just the math and engineering students, that's like the French majors and the poets and the bassoon players and the football guys. Everybody takes AP calculus. The problem is that AP calculus is not evenly distributed around the country. There are some schools where AP calculus is offered, but most American high schools don't, and especially most American high schools in low-income communities. So Yvonne was coming in from a high school that had not had AP calculus, and she was sitting in a classroom with a whole lot of people who not only had access to AP calculus, but had taken it, passed it, had basically done the course before. So she was at a disadvantage with all these students as she was sitting there. The third thing that I want to tell you as a preamble is about student psychology. So there's this idea that is popular at UT that actually started here at Stanford. This idea that came from these psychological researchers, Jeffrey Cohen and Gregory Walton and David Yeager, that there are these moments in people's lives where your identity gets very unsettled. When you have your first child, when you move to a new city, when you start a new job, and definitely when you start college. You don't quite know who you are. And one thing that psychologists understand is that we don't like being confused about our identity. If we don't know who we are, we sort of panic, and we look for any kind of signal about who am I, can I succeed, do I belong in this place? And that means that we're really susceptible at these moments of transition to signals about belonging and ability, both positive and negative ones. So for a college freshman, if you are getting, you're constantly bombarded with all these little signals. You have a fight with your roommate, you fail a test, you're walking across the campus and you wave to somebody and they don't wave back, all of these signals get expanded in your mind and you think, I don't belong here, I can't possibly fit in, I'm going to fail. But what these psychologists have also found is that that susceptibility means that you can bombard students with positive messages of belonging and potential, and that will make them much more likely to persist and to stay in school and to succeed. And Uri Treisman, this calculus professor, was really good at these messages. And so from the first day of class, Yvonne Martinez was hearing that she was a Longhorn, she was a Texan, she was going to be a scientist, she was going to be a math major, she was going to succeed. The problem was she was not succeeding. And in the first few tests she took, she was getting like, I think she got a 63 on the first one and a 57 on the second one. And Professor Treisman just kept telling her that success was just around the corner, she was gonna figure it out. But each night, each time she failed a test, she would go home to the apartment she shared with her sister, her older sister, who was a senior at UT. And she would sit on the couch and cry, and her sister would put her arm around her and say, that's okay, of course you got a bad grade. We're poor Latinas from the west side of San Antonio. We never do well in classes like this. And that is not, according to the psychological research, what you are supposed to say to someone in that moment. But for Yvonne, it actually felt a little bit reassuring. She was sitting here on the couch with her big sister, had her arm around her, and she was saying, you're part of something bigger. It's not just that you're a failure, it's that we're all failures. But somehow that felt okay to her. And so she actually spent a lot of time during this semester trying to figure out the answer to this question. Why am I failing? What is really going on? And finally, the message that made most sense to her came at the second midterm. And she had been studying the night before really hard and nothing was sinking in. She couldn't make the information stick. And so she got to the test and she was sitting on a bench, eyes full of tears, and her TA, this woman named Erica, came up and said, how are you doing? And she started crying, and they went off and sat on a bench and talked for a while. And Erica was a working class white student who had come from a very sort of blue-collar family, had done well in college, but had understood what it was like to go to an underserved high school and struggle with questions of identity and belonging. And what she said to Yvonne was, had some echoes of what Ileana said. She said, you know, you really are behind. You really are at a great disadvantage. It really is going to be harder for you to succeed in this class than for most of the other students. But then where her message diverged from Ileana's is she said, but how you're doing in class right now is not an indication of who you really are. And who you really are is a great mathematician. And if you want to work hard and learn this stuff, you can. You can succeed in this class, and if you want my help, I'm going to give it to you. And that sort of mix of those messages of realism and hope was exactly what Yvonne needed to hear. And there was something that switched for her at that moment. She started pushing herself more, sort of engaging with her own doubts more. Instead of just trying to copy down answers from other people, she was letting herself be confused about the messages. And I don't want to give away the end of the chapter, but there's a happy ending. That message was something that was really transformative to her. And so for me, what that story talks about is a lot of things. I mean, one is it says a lot about the importance of psychology in student success. I think that's true whether it's a student from a really low-income family or a very high-income family. There are a lot of messages that our kids are getting, and they can sometimes be incredibly confusing. But I think it also tells us something about the potential of unlikely students to succeed at highly selective, rigorous institutions. Yvonne was the second in her class by her GPA, but she had an ACT score of about a 24. And in most states, she would not be admitted to a highly rigorous calculus class at the flagship state institution of her state. But at UT, because of the top 10% rule, she was. And it was harder for her than it was for other students, but she succeeded. And to me, that is a sign not that we should take students like that and say they need another pathway, they need another route through life. It is a sign that we should say, this is the pathway for them. We just need to work a little harder to teach them.